Okay.
So how do you say your name? Is it Irina?
Irina, yes, exactly.
Okay.
First of all, I wanted to tell you, because I wrote this in the email, to tell you how much your book helped me. Actually, it did, because I'm a hypnotherapist and I work with women mostly because that's who I resonate with. And I have a lot of
Yeah.
clients who are emotional eaters. And
Mm-hmm.
in this relationship, I'm always the therapist. And after some time, I realized that I wanted to understand them, you know, more deeply, like I was in their shoes, actually. But
Yeah.
I can't do that when I'm doing the therapy, because I just have to keep looking for solutions and helping them
Right.
to go through this transition. And that's when I found your book, and I was reading your blog for some time, and then I decided to buy your book. And I would really advise to all therapists out there to read this, because it's one thing when the therapeutic methods and so on, but
Yeah.
being you, because that's kind of magical how you did that. You pulled me
Thank
in.
you.
So
Thank you.
yes, it resonates very deeply. And even though some of these issues are not present in my present life now, but
Mm-hmm.
I could
Mm-hmm.
relate, I could feel the feelings beneath them. So, and
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to talk with you about. So, uh, what made you write this book and open up? Because this is a sensitive thing.
It
Women.
is, and it's really it's so difficult to just put yourself out there like
Yes.
that. But I honestly was writing that for the 13-year-old girl out there who doesn't really know anyone who can understand what she's feeling.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to, I always say, like, I had a unique situation because I was very thin for most of my life, and I didn't start to gain weight and become a fat person until I was in my early 20s. So I feel like I lived two sides of it. But the funny thing is, even when I was thin, I felt fat, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
I think that, it really is a state of mind more than it is a number. And a good example of that is I've since been off of Weight Watchers and have put quite a bit of weight back on because I was working a lot. And however, I feel very differently. Like, I don't feel like that person anymore. I have confidence. I just feel completely different.
Yeah.
So I think that it really can be a state of mind. And I wanted to write this book and be so honest about it for the young women who were suffering from that state of mind. I mean, I can remember, Irina, being 160 pounds and thinking I was huge.
Mm-hmm.
And now I would murder somebody to be 160 pounds. I mean, 160 pounds is like an impossible number for me. But it just speaks to, it is a state of mind, because when you never feel good enough, you never feel thin enough, that it controls every aspect of your life.
Yeah, exactly.
And another thing is, just as a writer, I think, and if you knew me in person, you would know this as well, like, I just put it all out there all the time. Like, I'm just very open. There's nothing really that I hold back. So as a writer, I kind of do the same thing. And I've heard that message about Fat Girl Skinny quite a bit, was that it just felt very honest. And it felt very honest because it was very honest. I was writing Fat Girl Skinny as I was going through the events in the book. So, it was all very raw for me. And it took me 5 years to write that book. And I think I did 17 or 18 revisions on it. And with each revision, it was a little less raw. So you can imagine what the first draft looked like. But it was it's that's just who I am and how I am. Like I just put it out there and that's it.
Okay. So you were writing it as you were going through these changes because they are so fundamental changes. So you were kind of like doing a diary?
A little bit. So when I say I was writing it while I was going through it, the book covers my divorce from my first husband and then the year afterwards that I spent sort of trying to get a hold of my life. And I started working on this book right after that. So it was still very close. And, I was still in the process of mourning my marriage and discovering who I was for the first time. So it was really, a lot of people wait, 10, 15 years to write their memoir. Yes. I wrote it immediately after what had happened. So for better or for worse, I guess.
No, it was very strong. I mean, emotionally, you could feel that actually. I could feel it.
Yeah. I felt it. I was crying constantly while I was writing that book. And even now, it's so funny because I have a really hard time reading the end of it because I just get so emotional. Like I'll do readings, and if I read that last piece, I'm usually crying when I read it.
And I wanted to ask, what was your relationship with food? Because you write about it, and I want people to hear it from you. How it changed this relationship with food, emotional eating, and these feelings.
I had to come to terms with the fact that I was a food addict. I had to. And I don't necessarily think people wake up and say, I'm going to be a food addict today, obviously. Yeah. I think that we have, in the United States anyway, a very poor nutrition system designed, against us. So if you're lower class in this country, or you can't afford to eat, certain healthy foods, it's almost by design that you are eating bad food all the time. And because of the climate, I live in the Northeast, because of the climate, we don't have a lot of fresh fruit and vegetables at our disposal. So everything is kind of shipped to us or imported. So I'm not blaming that, but I'm just saying if you take that and you take somebody with an addictive personality, that's the perfect storm, right? So I had to start actually altering my behaviors. Like I can remember leaving work and I would lock my purse in the back of my car so that I would not be tempted to go through a drive-through. Like little things like that. I would be eating, and to stop myself from eating the rest of a meal, I would dump pepper on it. Like I had to do these things, and I know it sounds crazy, but I had to do them to break that behavior. And then once I broke the behavior, I felt better. And even now, like I still struggle. It's a daily struggle. It's a daily struggle for metabolic sobriety, essentially. So I'm still conscious of my behaviors. I still, of course, have times where I'm weak and I give in to them. Today's my birthday. I just had birthday cake, which I totally should not have had. It was really bad. But, it's okay. Like, I feel like I'm finally at a point in my life where I found a balance, where I can have some birthday cake and then eat healthy the rest of the week or whatever. But there are times where I can remember feeling like, why can't I just be like everyone else? Yeah. Why can't I just eat whatever I wanted? And then I started to realize that the people who are healthy are not eating like that. They can probably eat whatever they want, but they don't. So I started to really reevaluate my relationship with food. And it's so funny because my mom is a very healthy person. And she's never had food addiction. She's never had a bad relationship with food. She's one of these people who truly eats to survive. That's it. And she said to me one day after she read the book, she said, I don't understand why people with food addiction just can't get addicted to salads. I'm like, no, Mom, that's not how this works. It's not how this works. So I had to really come to terms with it and I knew from an early age that I had an addictive personality. I can remember like really liking experimenting with alcohol and, stuff like that when I was like a teenager. So I kind of knew I had an addictive personality a little bit. I didn't think it would manifest this way, but it did. And I think a lot of it, I've been in therapy for a year and a half now because I'm working on a new book about school shootings. So that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
So I've been in therapy for a long time, and I'm starting to realize that I've associated food with comfort in my life for a very long time, from childhood. So I think, getting that extra support and help and understanding where this behavior started has really helped me.
Yeah. Exactly. That's what I wanted to ask you, whether you have studied psychology or hypnotherapy or something, because this is exactly what we're dealing with, these subconscious programs. The way you said it,
Yeah.
these eating habits, they are programs, and the mind is just repeating, and eating habits as well, because comfort is a program, self-defense mechanism,
Yes.
comforting mechanism.
Yes.
So have you
Absolutely. I haven't studied it, but I've always been interested in that kind of topic. I've read a lot about it. I wouldn't say I formally have studied it, but my therapist has really helped me in a lot of ways with this. And it was interesting because the one day I was talking to my husband about our cat. Our cat is like scratching our new woodwork in our house. And I said to him, I want to buy some tape to put on the doorways. And my husband said, I don't want that tape on our doorway all the time. And I said, it only takes 3 weeks to break a habit. You just put the tape up. He'll, 3 or 4 weeks, he'll stop doing it and he'll move on to something else. And I'm thinking, why can't I apply that to me? So I kind of have started to do that kind of thing in my life where I'm like, if I just do this for 3 or 4 weeks, it will become a habit. Like some of these habits that are ingrained in us from childhood, we just never think that we can do something a different way. So my therapist just really helped me to see things not as, so in other words, my eating for comfort is not a personality trait. It's just a habit, and habits can be changed. So that's something that I've been working on.
Yeah. Okay. And could you please describe these stages that you went through from stages of awareness, of emotional awareness, of this mental pattern awareness? How did you go through this process?
Well, I think that I had good leaders. I was going to Weight Watchers meetings a lot. I was surrounding myself with people who were going through the same journey. And I think, we just have this tendency to accept things the way they are. And when I went through my divorce, I remember thinking of it as something that happened to me. And then I started to kind of try to reframe it as something that I was a part of as well. And so once you start to have agency in your life, then you can start to reclaim things. So it took a really long time for me to get to that awareness. And I would argue that I'm still kind of, struggling with that every day. But I'm definitely starting to see emotionally how my eating is connected to my actions, if that makes sense.
Okay. And how did you find the roots of these emotional issues in your past? Because I haven't read about any hypnotherapy or anything like that. So you were not in a trance, but you did some conscious work on that, haven't you? So you somehow.
Yeah, I did. And yeah, I'm going to say for me, I work a lot of stuff out in my writing. Like even, I didn't seek therapy out after my divorce. I probably should have, but I didn't. I turned to my writing. I mean, that's where there's a famous saying, I forget who said it off the top of my head, but someone asked a writer, like, why do you write? And this writer said, to figure the world out. And I think that's really true. Like, I have good self-reflection. I'm pretty aware of things that I feel and why I feel them. I've always been that way as a kid. But writing really helps me to sort of work it out in my head, if that makes sense. So that's why I said I wrote 17 drafts of this book, because it took me a while to get from my husband left me and I was a victim to we had a toxic relationship and I was a part of that. And I needed to work on myself. So like I needed to get through that emotional transition. And I did that by writing and writing and writing about it.
Yeah, okay, now I understand, because you tapped into such deep emotional issues that people usually need regression. But now I understand that writing is actually a kind of a trance state. So you tap into your subconscious content, those experiences, and how they affected, and you start to reframe it through writing. Now I understand. Okay, yeah, I haven't thought that about that.
Yeah.
So that was the tool.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Like, I have worked. So the book that I'm working on now it just came out, and we worked with 83 survivors of school shootings.
Yeah.
So we worked with people who've been through trauma. And that's one of the things that I've been working with them on, is writing and reframing the incident. So, reliving the trauma in a sense, but reframing the trauma in a different way. And that's, I mean, when you are divorced, when you are left unexpectedly or freed from a toxic relationship, it's trauma.
Yes.
And so the writing does the same thing.
Okay. And how do you reframe this trauma with these people?
So, in other words, we're trying to, for example, if you're working with 5 students who've all been through a school shooting, you want to help them try to find the lessons that they took from it, or some aspect of the shooting, and think about it in a way that is different from the narrative that's out there already, almost to try to take something from it that they normally wouldn't think to take. So that's kind of what I did with my own story. I reframed it several times until it worked.
And how do these students react to this work, to this reframing work?
I think it's a bit cathartic for them. I think that many of them, like, we're working with, I don't know how familiar you are with Columbine, the Columbine shooting that happened in the 90s. We're working with a lot of students that lived through that. And so, they're adults now. So to have them going back and thinking about it, it's easier because now they're adults, and of course it's reframed in a different way. But when we're working with students from more recent shootings, we have to give them the time and space to think about it and put context around their experience. But they seem to be, a lot of the students who lived through school shootings 20 years ago in this country seem to want to speak out and tell their stories. I don't think they know how to. So I think that this project was especially useful for the country to hear these stories, and for these students and survivors to be able to write about it.
Okay. So, and you are working on this book right now?
We just finished it. It came out September 3rd.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it came out. Okay. And how is it called? Because it's very exciting. I would love to hear.
It's called If I Don't Make It, I Love You. And it's based on, I don't know, are you familiar with the Parkland shooting that happened in Florida in 2018? So there was a shooting inside a high school in Parkland, Florida in 2018, and one of the students texted her mother from inside the school and said, "If I don't make it, I love you." And we saw that text and we thought, that is really the crux of what's at stake here with these gun incidents in schools. So we named the book that, and the book has 83 survivor stories from 21 different school shootings and 52 different years, or 52 years is the span.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. I haven't heard about this book,
Yeah,
but this it sounds very exciting, especially from therapeutic point of view.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. It's very interesting just to see, we were interested in the vicarious trauma of these school shootings and the ripple effect of the trauma, and to see what the caretakers and parents and friends and siblings, how they live in the wake of this. So that's kind of what we tried to capture.
Yeah. Okay. So does this trauma, because every trauma affects not just the person, but their close family and relationships,
Sure.
everything. And in what ways did this kind of experience affect the families of these people as they grew up and became adults? How did this affect them as adults?
Well, it's interesting because I'll give you an example. We had a family, we had a chapter from the Jewish Community Center in Granada Hills in Los Angeles, and two young children were shot in that shooting. One was 6 and one was 16 at the time. They both survived, and they both write about their experiences in very different ways, which I think is pretty interesting. The younger of the victims, Josh, he was 6, he writes about a time when he met somebody else who told him, "You speak for my daughter." I guess her daughter had been killed by gun violence. And he felt that as a burden that he carried throughout his life. He always felt like his life was not his own, that he had to live up to something.
Yeah.
Conversely, the other person who was shot in that same shooting, the girl who was 16, Mindy, she felt it as an honor when that person said that to her. She felt like, this is something I'm honored to do and speak. So it was very interesting to see how that one encounter with somebody played out in two very different ways for people. Another instance is we have a student who wrote for us, and her brother was killed in the Sandy Hook school shooting, the elementary school shooting. And she wrote about how she feels that she has to live up to this certain idea of advocacy for gun violence because she has this legacy thrust upon her because her parents started an advocacy group and they, have spent their lives dedicated to that. So it's kind of interesting, what expectations are placed on survivors, what care they receive or don't receive in many ways. It's very interesting. It's been an interesting sociological project.
Yeah. I bet. I bet.
Quite different from Fat Girl Skinny.
Yeah. Yeah.
Quite different.
So,
but in a way, it's very similar. Like in a way, it's you're asking people to just put the darkest parts of them out there, the softest, I should say, parts of them out there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, because this is what we're talking about. Trauma is sometimes accepted and understood because a public shooting is obviously a traumatic event. But most of the time, we don't realize that we are traumatized by simple events, everyday events. It's not regarded as, something so serious,
Right.
But
even people, if you have people in abusive relationships, that trauma lives with you forever, for the rest of your life. I was not in a physically abusive relationship, but I have a close friend who was, and emotionally and physically, and that trauma lives in her. I see it all the time playing out.
Yes.
So it's definitely something that we don't treat the way we should in our country. In America, we definitely do not treat it the way that we should.
Yes, and trauma has so many faces, so many manifestations, and people are like expected to go on and be normal.
Yeah. There was one school shooting. It happened in 1997, and it was, not really big news at the time. And they opened the school back up the next day, and they thought that the best thing to do was to just move forward,
Yeah.
because that's what, was best for the students, to just pick up and move forward. And so what happened is you saw a delayed response to trauma in those students.
Mm-hmm.
They started all that trauma started manifesting itself in different ways throughout their lives, and then coming to a head when the shooting started to affect their kids' generation.
Mm-hmm.
So it was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes.
I mean, you could bury it, but it won't go away.
Yeah. Exactly. That's very good. That's a visual, that we usually bury it in the subconscious mind, and
Yeah.
we try to go on, but you cannot bury
Yeah.
it. It will come up in some way or form, and the relationship, so this connection will be maybe not so obvious. It will be maybe.
Yeah. So for example, to speak to that, I write in Fat Girl Skinny, I touch on, I don't spend a lot of time writing about it, but I touch on a sexual assault that happened to me when I was 12 or 13 years old. I never realized, I never made the connection that as I was starting to put on weight, I was protecting myself from being objectified, sexualized. And I didn't make that connection until I was in therapy, like this last year.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it was like, it just, yeah, that's what I was doing. Because I had developed very early and very well as a young kid. And I can remember just being objectified all the time for my body. And once the sexual assault happened, you just go into protection mode. And I never connected those two things. So I'm also starting to kind of see things that I didn't write about in Fat Girl Skinny. I wrote about it, I touched on it, but I should have spent a lot more time on it in the book. So I'm working on a new memoir now, and I think I'm going to talk about it a lot more.
Yeah. There are lots of girls who went through some sexual assault or something that they perceived as such, so not
Yes.
physical but emotionally sexual
Yes.
assault.
Yeah.
And what would be your advice to them? How could they deal with that?
Well, my mother put me in therapy when that happened. I didn't tell her willingly. She read about it in my diary, which is problematic all in its own. But she put me in therapy at the time, and it just was not a good match. Therapy in the 90s was not what it is now. So I think that, our kids have it a lot better in the sense that therapy has come so far and is so helpful and productive now. And it's often paid for through insurance now. Like my parents had to pay for it out of pocket. It was really just not common. So my recommendation would be to seek out a therapist immediately, but also to understand that rape and sexual assaults mean different things to different people. And if you feel violated in some way, that is a valid feeling that you have been violated. Either your trust or your body or whatever has been violated. Like that's real. And there comes trauma with that, and you need to work on that. I would not recommend doing what I did, which was just burying it for so many years.
Yeah. Okay. And what would be your advice to women? How could they become aware that they are food addicts, that they have an emotional love and hate relationship with food, and that they have the control in some sense?
Well, I think that you have to start asking yourself, I started to really become conscious of my food behaviors, to say to myself, why am I eating this? Am I hungry? Do I need this? Like, what am I getting out of it? And often I didn't have an answer to that. The answer was like, no, I'm not hungry. I just want to eat this cheeseburger from McDonald's because it tastes good. But that's not so I started questioning like why I was eating things and trying to become aware. And if if you have a hard time, two things. If you have a hard time breaking the habit, that's usually a sign that's an addictive behavior.
Mhm.
And also, if you find yourself making excuses to eat, like I'm eating as a reward all the time, or you find yourself hiding your eating, you don't want to eat in front of people, that those are big red flags for me.
Mhm.
And I never realized that I had done that so much. And I really had. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I ate in my car
Mhm.
because I didn't want anybody to see me eating. But if I was eating healthy and normal, like I wouldn't have that hang up about it.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think it's, examining the actual practical behaviors around the eating itself.
Mhm.
Like it's overwhelming to think, I need to look at the scope of my life and see if I'm food addicted. But it's easy to say, why am I eating this meal right now? So I think, if we focus on the small behaviors, then maybe we can
Mhm.
understand what's driving it.
Yeah. And you know, sometimes we lie to ourselves. And how
A lot of time.
yeah, okay. A lot of times
Yeah.
we lie to ourselves. We don't want to lose our self-image, that idealize something, and we don't want to face the ugly truth. And what
Hmm.
was your strategy to see behind your own self-protective lies, or these?
Well, I think that, I had the worst thing for somebody with food addiction is an accepting partner,
Uh-huh.
or, a life that you feel comfortable in. And I don't like, I know that sounds weird because you should have people who love you and accept you in your life. So maybe I'm looking at enabling more. Like my first husband enabled me
Mhm.
because not only did he eat poorly, but he allowed me to do it. And when I say allowed, he encouraged me to
Mhm.
do it.
Mhm.
So, I think that you really have to be aware of your surroundings. And if you're with a partner who has terrible eating habits too, that's really hard.
Mhm.
You need to work together, I think, on eating healthier and seeing food for what it is. So I don't know. I think that, I just one day had no other choice than to look in the mirror and say, I have to do something here, because I knew that I didn't want to end up with diabetes, overweight, whatever, by the time I was 35 years old. So I think that my case was very easy because there was a hard choice, that, or an easy choice that I had to make because somebody else made it for me, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And why would he encourage you? What do you think? What was his gain in making you even more addicted?
I think that I just say I think that he needed me to stay there,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Mhm.
I mean, he was very sick himself and he needed me to take care of him and he needed me to stay there. And for me to stay there, he needed me to have low self-esteem,
Uh-huh.
because that was the only way I was going to stay there.
Mhm. Okay, so it was
So
a kind of
it's
control.
funny because, yes, and I don't think he did it maliciously. I don't even know if he did it consciously.
Mhm.
He just, that was the dynamic of our relationship. And it was funny because I had joined Weight Watchers and lost maybe happened that I was starting to feel better about myself.
Mhm. Mhm.
Hmm.
Okay. I understand. Okay. Well, thank you very much for this interview, and
Thank you.
I found it very exciting, especially those insights into emotions, trauma, addiction. So these things that we don't really like to talk about, These,
Yeah. And my advice too would be, we're living in a very strange time right now. It's very hard.
Yes.
And self-care is very important, but it's important not to associate food with self-care.
Yes. Yes.
So you can still indulge yourself, you can still comfort yourself, just, in different ways.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, and I hope that we can have another chat sometime.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you have so many exciting topics that I just oh, I want to know about this and that, and don't
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
overwhelm you with all those questions.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime.
Okay, very good. Because
Thank you so much.
I think many people would be very interested to go more in depth on your new book. Oh God, in your new book and trauma.
It's been very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been very interesting.
Okay. Okay. So we will then have some conversation about that more in depth, not just.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Irina. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I will send you this video if you want. Okay.
Oh,
That I
great.
made. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.